11. Oh, thank you, Jill. It's 11:30 on February 9th, 2021. I'm going to call the Legal and Justice System Committee to order, and I'd like to start with reading the land acknowledgement statement. Before we begin, we acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional and unceded territory of Lummi, Nuksak, Samish, Semiahmoo people who have cared for and tended this land since time immemorial. Truth and acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect and connection across all barriers of heritage and difference. We begin this effort to acknowledge what has been buried by honoring the truth. We pay respect to their elders, past and present. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us together here today. And please join us in uncovering such truths at any and all public events. And I think we can proceed with the update from Darlene Peterson on electronic home monitoring and in the Bellingham Municipal Court.
Good morning.
Darlene, are you ready?
I am. Can you hear me okay, Raylene?
I can.
Okay. I'm Darlene Peterson, the court administrator for the Bellingham Municipal Court. And with me today is our jail alternatives and diversion manager, Kathy Smith. Raylene asked me to give you a presentation about what changes we have observed in GPS Scram due to COVID-19. So first, a little bit of background. We began using GPS in 2016 with Friendship Diversion Services. In the summer of 2016, we added Scram, which is for alcohol monitoring. GPS is in lieu of sentencing, and Scram is for alcohol monitoring. The cost for the bracelets are $14.50 for one bracelet or $25 for both. The city does subsidize the program so that anyone who lacks finances is not unable to participate. And the city subsidizes that with a 150% of the poverty level baseline. Go ahead, Kathy, to the next screen. You can see that the increases in GPS through 2019 and the increases in Scram use through 2019 continued to grow. They were growing each year. However, in GPS, our numbers went down, and in Scram, they did go up. They continued on that trend. We will note that in 2020, our criminal charges filed dropped in half. And so it was very interesting that, as we noted, Scram kept going up, although our caseload dropped in half. And now Kathy will take over, and she's going to address some of the challenges that we've observed. And then at the end, we'll be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Good morning, everybody. So like Darlene was saying, you can see that our numbers, we started with 2017 because that was actually our first full year. Even though we started kind of early in 2016, we typically try to start with our stat comparison in 2017 because we had a full 12 months of services then. So for GPS, you can see that we pretty much steadily increased until that pretty significant drop for 2020. And basically, I think we could attribute that to the fact that our courthouse closed, I believe, March 26th. And we were closed all of April and all of May. So we weren't holding any hearings. And at that point, we weren't even having telephonic hearings. And at the same time, the jail was on some pretty restrictive booking criteria. So both due to construction issues at the jail and then of course COVID. And they were basically only accepting DV arrests and DUIs. And so during that 2-month period, because of the booking restrictions and the fact that we were closed, we simply didn't have any cases that were resolving, which is primarily what we use the GPS device for, is for sentencing. And so I think that's why that number is significantly less than it was in previous years. And then you can see our scram kind of had the opposite effect, that it steadily increased, and then we really jumped up for the numbers of enrollment in 2020. And again, I think that's partly attributed to the booking restrictions. A lot of folks for DUI were booked and then immediately released. And the court typically only requires scram for a repeat offender. So a lot of folks, if it's their first DUI and they don't have a history of alcohol-related offenses, the court typically doesn't order the scram device to be attached. However, we do use it as a sanction for those defendants who maybe a first-time alcohol-related offense and they don't have scram, but then they violated their pretrial release conditions. And so sometimes the city will ask the court to go ahead and have scram attached because of those pretrial violations. And I think that's one of the significant reasons that our numbers jumped up in 2020 for scram. And so here's a breakdown of the actual number of days ordered. This is obviously only for post-conviction. We do use a GPS bracelet for pretrial, either in lieu of bail or as active GPS monitoring for defendants who are, I guess, can't be trusted to stay out of exclusion zones and to stay away from protected parties. So you can see that the numbers ordered for post-conviction significantly dropped in 2020 after they were mostly steadily increasing from 2017. And again, I attribute that to the fact that the court was closed for 2 months. And so folks weren't able to get their cases resolved. And even since opening, we're doing telephonic hearings, but because of the length of time and it takes to hold a telephonic hearing, we're typically limiting our calendars to 15 defendants per calendar. Whereas, when we were open, that same calendar may have 30 to 45 defendants on it. And so I think that's the reason that our total number of days dropped for 2020. Here's our average. You can see a significant drop in 2020 for the average days that a defendant might spend on a GPS bracelet. And again, we just kind of attribute that back to the court closures, the booking restrictions. And if you looked at our average per month, where we typically have 27 to 30 defendants enrolled in a month, during the summer, some of those months we had maybe 5 to 7 defendants. And so that was a significant decrease for us. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, you can see that our total days on the alcohol bracelet increased significantly. And again, folks weren't able to get their cases resolved. Even when we opened back up, calendars were restricted to a limited number of defendants. And so people were just spending more time on the bracelet as their cases moved through the system. And this was pretty significant. Our average days for our defendants to be on the alcohol bracelet. You can see in 2020, the average went from 119 to 160 days. In 2019, we only had one defendant that was actually on a scram bracelet more than 400 days. And in 2020, we had 5 defendants who were spent more than 400 days on the bracelet. And I think the record holder, I think he spent 537 days on a scram bracelet. So that's almost 2 years. And again, just for the same reasons that we already discussed, that were primarily COVID related, and then some of the jail issues as well. Here's some of our overall SCRAM compliance numbers. The left column shows what our program's compliance rate is, and then the right column shows what the national average is. You can see that we significantly dropped our compliance rate in 2020, whereas the national rate only dropped by a few percentage points. I don't know what the reason for that is. Ronnie may be able to weigh in later on what her thoughts are. My gut feeling is if you look at all the other numbers, when we compare use of SCRAM to the national numbers, we typically keep defendants on the bracelet longer than the national average. And I think because of that, I think that affects our overall compliance rate. As people are just on the device longer, gives them more opportunity to have violations and be less compliant. But again, Ronnie may have some input on that as to what she thinks that that number represents for us. And our percentage of sober days, although not a significant drop, there was definitely a drop in 2020 for us. And again, just off the cuff, knowing what we know about the program and sitting in court, I know a lot of folks had trouble accessing services, so they weren't able to get evaluations, which meant they weren't able to get into treatment. AA meetings pretty much stopped when everything shut down this summer. And so I think folks just were struggling to maintain their sobriety when all of those services and those support systems basically shut down because of COVID. And I hear that in even our mental health court as well. So I'm going to say that I think that's what attributed to the percentage of sober days dropping a little bit for us. But I think over 99%, I think we still are doing a pretty good job, and folks are staying pretty safe. That's all I have, unless you guys have any questions.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Darlene. Is there any questions? I can't see everybody for hands raised, so help me out, Jill. Oh, Stephen.
Thanks, Darlene and Kathy. I'm just wondering if you could remind us what happens when there's non-compliance, and what sort of sanctions or anything are imposed, and how do those responses compare to national practices as well?
Well, first I can tell you that during COVID, we have had defendants with multiple violations, 7, 8, 9 violations. However, since our usual sanction after multiple violations is that a defendant may spend a few days in jail or something like that, that's not an option now. And so that has been one of the real difficulties during COVID, is that while someone is wearing the bracelet, they are being monitored probation, but there's no real teeth in it. And I think that's been the hardest thing. It's a fine balance between keeping the community safe and not having people out there drinking. Many of these people don't have licenses, but many of them drive. And so that's been a particularly hard thing for us to face as a court with multiple violations. If we have had a situation where we just feel that it is very dangerous and that the community is at risk, Wendy Jones has worked with us, and we have been able to book people who were having serious issues. But that is one thing that we've noticed. Kathy, I don't know if you have any more to add than that.
No, I think that's all accurate. And I think the one portion of Stephen's question was what some of the sanctions are. I mentioned earlier, usually for first-time offenders, they're not asked or not ordered to have the SCRAM device. And so what SCRAM has given us is kind of an intermediate sanction between nothing or maybe ETGUAs with probation and then jail. And so the SCRAM device, what I've seen just spending some more time in court, has been used as an intermediate step. So if somebody not on the device has repeated alcohol violations, then usually they're put on a SCRAM device, and then it kind of escalates from there if they continue to have violations.
One thing I would also note is that SCRAM is very beneficial for defendants who are working and have a job. In the past, they would have to report to probation, sometimes daily for breath tests, or sometimes several times a week for a urinalysis test. With the SCRAM bracelet, they don't have to do that. So it is less of a disruption. And the other thing I would add is that if they're on a bracelet for pre-trial reasons, there is no cost to the defendant. That's something that the city pays entirely. So while you see some of those days of long amounts while we're waiting for cases to be resolved, that sometimes can take up to a year or more, the city has been absorbing most of those costs. And that has increased the city's bill significantly. But the good note for defendants is that not having financial wherewithal is not going to keep you from being on the bracelet.
Any other questions? Am I missing any hands out there? Okay, I want to thank Darlene and Kathy for all the information. It's been very helpful. I'm going to go.
Just one sec. Stephen Gockley has his hand raised. Kathy, can you stop sharing there you go. Thank you.
Sorry to be so talkative. I just wanted to check and see whether either of you had any evaluative comments, probably pro, con also, on working with Friendship Diversion Services. I know they don't have all the monitoring contracts but they're being considered for some. So I'm interested in your view of them as a partner.
From my
Well,
perspective,
I guess I'll,
go ahead, Kathy.
oh, go ahead, Darlene. Go
I
ahead.
was going to say, from my perspective as somebody in charge of the court, the beauty of having Friendship, besides the fact that they are a nonprofit organization, is that they handle all of the paperwork. When we have a defendant, they go to Friendship Diversion, they get the person signed up, go through the initial interview. They're the ones that monitor it. They notify the court when there are any violations, and then the court is willing or able to proceed on those violations. Without that service, I don't think my court could be doing this. And so we would have to have an agency that has that capability. With the county, you have the jail that can help with those kinds of things. Of course, with the city, we don't. And so their help has been invaluable in keeping this program running. Kathy, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would definitely, as someone who actually opened the FDS office here with Ronnie and Barbara back in 2016 when we started the contract with the city, and then continuing to work with them as an agent of the court, I can say that FDS is, I can't imagine doing business with anybody else. They worked with us to get the program off the ground. They're been super responsive. Anything we've asked of them, they've been able to do, and Ronnie and Barbara's expertise has just been invaluable. So I think the program has grown immensely, and we both experienced some growing pains with that, but I think on most days we're a well-oiled, finely tuned machine, and if anyone came to me for a recommendation, I'd have no qualms at all about talking about what a great job Ronnie and them do.
I'd like to make a quick comment on that, Kathy, as well, because obviously Blaine, Everson, and Sumas are also using Friendship Diversion Services. And one thing that we have that's been working out really well is that we actually have a representative from Friendship Diversion Services sitting in court on the Wednesdays that we have probation. This is very beneficial for defendants that don't have transportation. Whether they're being set up for GPS and Scram or GPS for home detention, where they've been given 7 to 10 days to serve, rather than having to find transportation to get to jail alternatives. If that was something that we're sentenced to, they now have that option when the judge orders it to be hooked up right there in our courtroom, instead of having to figure out how they're going to get to Bellingham. Sometimes they do have to go to Bellingham, but it's not as much as required before. So they are literally going from the judge's orders to probation and then to FDS if they're ordered to be on that. It's a one-stop shop. And that's eliminated some warrants that we would have been issuing in the past because they couldn't set up their time in a timely manner due to transportation issues. So it's definitely beneficial for Blaine. Any other?
Nice.
All right, hearing none, because we have a full agenda, I am going to move on to Bruce. They have a little bit of a different program that we're currently using. And Bruce, if I can just ask you to do me a favor, because we do have a presentation from Ronnie coming up after you. If I could have you report on the electronic equipment program first, pause, let Ronnie do her presentation, and then come back to you for the domestic violence portion.
Yeah, that'll work fine because we don't have a domestic violence update for you today. We just weren't able to get that information compiled. So, but we do have some information about the electronic equipment program. And Jake and I are going to sort of split up how we present that information. I don't know if you've all met Jake Webush. He's our fairly new, in the last 14 months or so, new probation manager. So Jake is going to be helping out as well with some information that he has a little bit better hands-on information than I have myself. So let me looking for my notes here. So our program has not been in existence quite as long as the Bellingham program. And also there are some serious differences in the program and how it is implemented and the rules that are played as with our process. So it sounded like, Kathy, you said you folks started in 2016. Our program started in 2018. It started with a pretty slow ramp up. Our first year, we were given $20,000 as sort of this pilot project. And we ended up getting a bit more money on that for that year, but it was a very slow ramp up. We'd never done a program like this before in the county in this manner because it's a bit different than with Bellingham's, because what the part that probation is involved in does not include jail sentences. Now that's something that's done through the sheriff's alternative program. That's the way it has always been. And so that's a separate program where Bellingham, it sounds like, does both what we do and the jail alternative. And so we do not have people serving a sentence on the program that probation is involved in. So we started in 2018. It was February. We went on 2019. We were able to I think I'm wrong. Hold on. I got my wrong set of notes here. So we saw a big ramp up in 2019. And we have worked with the jail alternative program with this for since the beginning. We'd worked with them before in other kinds of programs, but I'm not sure if it's so-called parks program or the work release kinds of things with our defendants. And so, so with our part of this program, we ramped up. In 2019, we spent about $60,000. So we saw a pretty big jump. 2020, we ran into a money problem. That was last year. And it is very hard. I think it's almost impossible for us to draw out how the pandemic has influenced the use of this program because of we ran out of money. And so would more or less people have been put on because of the pandemic? I don't know. I could make some guesses, but I'm not really sure that's going to be helpful to anybody. So what happened last year we were given $120,000. So it was a pretty big increase over the previous year. But it was, the enrollments were fast and furious. It was very popular with the prosecutors, public defenders. It was popular with the judges. It was being used in different ways with probation. And so that $120,000, that money was committed by about May. And remember, that was early in the pandemic. So the money was committed in May. And so essentially I had to stop all new enrollments for the rest of 2020. And an attempt was made by myself to get CARES money to pay for additional funding. And the state turned us down, and my application had the support of Superior Court. It had the support of the judges. It was a rather lengthy application, rather detailed in nature. And then in the end, they came back and did not. So I had no more access to funding. And so essentially in May, we pretty much cut off new enrollments. Every now and then a judge would put somebody on, but not in a substantial way. So would more or less have been put on? I don't really know. It's hard to know. And then we've got not just a pandemic, but the complications that were taking place with the jail and them dealing with COVID and the potential of COVID in the jails. So that's how we are unable to really provide any kind of clear-cut information about how the pandemic might or might not have impacted it. We do have more money this year. I asked for $200,000 and was given $200,000 for this year and for next year. So as we begin this year, we are able to get those enrollments back up as judicial officers order people to be on this program. So let's see. I think that we are. Actually, I'm really excited about this year because we've got the more money. I think we're going to see some really nice use of the program, and by that I mean all the parties seem interested. The additional funding for this year was supported by both, not just the judges, of course, but the prosecutor's office, the public defenders, and now we just need to ramp ourselves back up. And I think we might get a better sense, just as the pandemic plays out, and also how enrollments change and whatnot, see how it's going to affect, how the pandemic might affect us in the future. But in the past, because it was skewed by us running out of money and my inability to find any way to find a source of money, which I pursued a number of options, all of which I came up with empty. So so that's kind of just a quick summary of some of the information and how we got where we are. I think, like I said, I think this is going to be a good year for this program. We work with the sheriff's office is sort of the friendship diversion of who we work with. The jail alternative program, they contract with WASPIC for devices. Our defendants are in contact with the jail alternative program. They go through the contract with them. They install the device. They're also the ones that retrieve the devices when the participation in the program is over. And we have it's been a great working relationship. We've got a really very tight communication structure set up so that when violations take place or someone fails to report to install a device, we know very, very quickly, and we can act on that. We can present that information to the judges. We can, just depending on what it is that did or didn't happen the way it was supposed to, we were able to take good, very quick action. And that's been a critical piece of this the success of the program, is that that communication link that we have with the jail alternative program and out at that old center, because it is a liability. These kind of programs are liability. There's no question. We all knew it going into it, that this creates a liability for the jurisdiction. And with us using the sheriff's office as sort of our vendor, they're another department with the county. I don't know if vendor is the right word, but I do know that we've been able to make it work very successfully. And when we've had anything that needs discussing, it's been some seriously positive problem solving that takes place. So I think at this point, I'll hand it over to Jake, and he'll have some other information for you. And then we'll just see if there's any questions.
Hi, my name is Jake. I was going to give you an update real quick. Again, like Bruce said, it's not used in lieu of jail or a jail sentence. It's separated there, and the judges often use it, like Kathy mentioned, when entering or putting someone on pretrial monitoring, and they've got multiple offense priors, or there's a history of alcohol consumption that they're concerned with. They'll put them on and perhaps either PR them at that point or have a reduction in bail based off of this tool. Probation officers use this for both pretrial and post-conviction cases when violations come up with continued use. I think we've had a total of 199 defendants come through the program since 2018. Looking at the numbers, it was actually about almost exactly a 50-50 split between pretrial cases and post-conviction cases that have been monitored by our department in the court. Again, it's used by probation officers to, when violations come up, people aren't in treatment, they're struggling to stay sober, we can place them on this device until they can get into treatment, or be that kind of parallel through the treatment process to hold them accountable. The devices that are available, there's a couple. One is a transdermal ankle monitoring. It's a bracelet that goes on their ankle. It monitors alcohol through the skin. It's very effective. The other device is a handheld device, kind of like a portable breath test that they would blow into multiple times a day. And then we also have a GPS option for those domestic violence cases with the restriction zones that can be implemented. Those aren't used quite as much with this program currently, primarily used for the alcohol. But again, like Bruce mentioned, it's a unique program that has a real buy-in from both the prosecutor's office with the accountability aspect and with the defense, and the fact that, you know, very often it's an alternative for maybe a sanction that could have led to a jail penalty. So we really enjoy it. We like having the option there at our fingertips, and I think it's really beneficial to our clients. We have staff meetings regularly, and we share success stories typically at the beginning of those staff meetings, and very often it comes around someone who was on a device and how it's helped them. Sometimes we've had people go to court and ask that it not be taken off, just because it kind of gives that safety blanket for them. So it's been a great resource to have, and we're appreciative of all the partners that have helped us along the way. So yeah, any questions you guys have?
You know, one thing I did want to add, is that we also work with Friendship Diversion with the cities that contract with that, and we have that same. When I was talking about the necessity for clear, direct, timely communication, and when I was talking about the success we have the jail alternative program, that we have that same success with Friendship Diversion. And
Absolutely.
So I didn't mean to leave them out, but I was a little more focused because they're the sheriff's office is the vendor for our defendants. But we have that same working relationship with Friendship Diversion, and the same thing with the problem solvings for the city courts that do contract with them. So we work with both agencies, but it's the sheriff's office that is our, I don't think vendor is the right word, but they are the department for our defendants that does the installation and the monitoring of the equipment and that kind of thing.
Any questions for Bruce or Jake at this time? I'm going to unmute myself again. I'm just click happy over here. I want to go over a couple things before I turn this over to Ronnie. One, I wanted you guys to know that the reason I invited Ronnie to go over some of this stuff is we have some new people that have joined our committee, some changes, and she's going to be able to explain the devices way better than I ever could and answer any questions that anybody might have in reference to the GPS and Scram. This is not an advertisement for Friendship Diversion Services, although we are very satisfied with their services, so I don't want to discount that. I just wanted to go over a few numbers. I don't have a lovely slide presentation that Darlene and Kathy put together, but for Blaine, just for 2020, we had 31 clients with a 97.4% sober days statistic, which is pretty good for those that were on Scram. For the city of Everson for 2020, they had 12 people monitored and they had a 99.5% sober days. And then for the city of Sumas, which is a much smaller city, they only had 5 clients monitored, but they had 99.7% on sober days. Which is pretty significant on trying to keep people sober that are required to, especially when we're looking at somebody that's got a DUI, it's their second offense, and there is a statute that requires the 24/7 monitoring pre-trial and not post-conviction for DUIs. It's also very helpful for those that have domestic violence cases. When there's significant cases where the victims don't want a no contact order, but they say the reason that there was violence in that situation was alcohol related. And there have been times where the judge has been willing to lift the no contact order as long as that person is sober and being monitored by Scram. So it's an alternative that he can say, okay, if there's any violations, we're going to note this up, probation's going to note it up, and we're going to put that no contact back in place because we want everybody to be safe. So it's not just DUIs. We were also looking at domestic violence cases as well. And it has been very helpful for the courts that I've been involved with, knowing that they have it. Arlene, you have a quick question?
Yes, I'm thinking about the fact that these reports are giving us positive information about our all over task here, which is we are the task force to divert. And so this information, I'm not sure how are we, I'm not even sure how to say this. How are we evaluating our these accomplishments in light of our whole task here? Is anybody doing that? Because it's the reason we're here.
Arlene, I think it would be something that we would have to look at statistics on those that weren't put in jail or kept in jail pre-trial or post-conviction. And I can tell you, I know the judge feels that it's important that we have an alternative tool. And we have had people that normally would have done jail time that are now out both, but I don't know if we have the specific numbers on that. And that's something that we need to look at and evaluate a little bit more. I don't know if you have an answer on that, Darlene?
You know, that's really hard because what I do know with the bracelets is that many people in the past who had violations for probation that they had, their sentences would have been in jail. And since we've had the bracelets, I know that that's cut down enormously. We have never figured out a way to compare that As far as what we were doing before and what we're doing now, I know that it's been significant, a significant number. I will definitely think about that, but I don't have anything at this point that I know of that I could point to.
Go ahead, Stephen.
I think Arlene's question is a really good one. In the steering committee, as we've reported to the task force, there's been considerable attention paid to how we can communicate better the accomplishments of the task force to the broader community, rather than sitting amongst ourselves and talking about improvements in the process. The outcomes, the reductions and the preventions of incarceration are really the impact message we haven't been conveying particularly well. And if I could just suggest, and Jill maybe ask for your help, if we could put this on the agenda for the next steering committee meeting, it might be worth an organized effort to figure out how we can quantify the reduction and prevention of incarceration out of these variety of programs that we're hearing about and that we've been experimenting with over the last 3 or 4 years. I know in the past we've hired Mark Gardner from the City Council legislative staff to do some work for us, and maybe there's some way that we could develop or explore a methodology for quantifying this and then develop a report that would be presentable to the community and show what we've achieved through these programs.
I think that's very important what you're talking about, because if this is all happening and the community doesn't have a clue that this is being accomplished, not even, I mean, I would even doubt if our council members know the details of this, which is very important and significant social progress that has been made. Thank you to everybody for what you've done. I really appreciate it. But I want the community to know about this, because a lot of them are pretty angry about what they see as lacks in our system. And I think it's optimistic that the gaps and the lacks in our system are being addressed, and helping people avoid the trauma of being in jail, and also getting services that can help them get onto a stable path, which is wonderful. So I think the telling of the stories to the community is absolutely essential task for us also.
The one thing I would add is that what I've been presenting to the city council is the number of days that we have had defendants on GPS. That is the substitute for jail time. And generally, every year I present a state of the court in which I let them know how many days defendants have spent on a bracelet where they would have been in custody. And that is the one way we can measure how many days or how much jail time we're saving. A lot of times they're interested in the cost savings, because it is much less expensive to have people on bracelets than it is to have them incarcerated. I've also presented with Chief Dahl before he left on the benefits to the community and to the defendants. There is no way that we can come up with to quantify how many people on scram bracelets would have been getting jail days for violations. That's something, there's just no way that we have to measure that. So as for my court, I know that our measurement has been how many days on the actual GPS bracelets were served rather than what would have been in jail. And then, like I said, the alcohol monitoring, I just don't know how, because each time a violation comes before the court, when you have that option, they're always going to go with that option.
I think that when families want to hear these stories, I think they want a personal story. And I think it's possible to get people who are happy that they had the alternatives to tell their stories if they want to. Obviously, it's private, but some people want to tell about it, and other people want to hear it in that form. statistics put people to sleep, unfortunately, and we want them to stay awake and be interested. And it's the psychological piece that's absolutely crucial in all this. At least that's, my motivation. I'm not looking families healed and people moving towards goals that they're glad about instead of unhappy about. So it's those stories, I think, that could make a difference, just a few of them.
Thank you, Arlene. I appreciate it. I don't see any other hands right now, so I'm going to move forward with Ronnie with Friendship Diversion Services, and she's going to give a little bit of a presentation on the devices, what they do, how they do it, how they read it, so you guys have a little more information on what it is. And so go ahead, Ronnie, and I think Jill, she might need to share her screen, so hopefully things work.
Ronnie, you're muted and you should have the ability to share your screen.
Okay.
All right, Ronnie, it looks like you're unmuted, and the bottom of the screen that you have, it should have a little green arrow that says share screen. So you should be able to go right there.
Okay. Sorry, this is my first time doing this by Zoom. So my name is Ronnie Waste. I am the director for Friendship Diversion Services. We're a nonprofit organization that has been around for many, many years. Friendship started in conjunction with a beginning alliance in the late 70s. And then we branched off to our own corporation, and a beginning alliance is now the Olympia Work Release Center for DOC. When I came to work for Friendship, I opened offices in Clallam and Jefferson counties. And after a couple of years, one of the judges came to me and said, look, we have not had an electronic home monitoring program. We can't staff it. Would you consider doing it? And so part of that is that I had experience with electronic home monitoring because I was in probation for 10 years. And one of the things that I wanted to do is I wanted to make sure that we had equipment that was reliable and something that I felt really good about saying, okay, this is a violation, this isn't. So we use for our GPS device a device called Rely Alert, and that company, that manufacturer is Track Group. And I've got a little bit of information about both of the devices. For our alcohol monitoring, we use alcohol monitoring system Scram device, which is a very popular alcohol monitoring tool. And with the alcohol monitoring tool, it is continuous monitoring. So it's a bracelet that is attached to the ankle. It tests the offender's sweat gas every 30 minutes, 24 hours a day. And then it goes through a series, and I've got some slides to kind of show you what that's like. It tests those gas for the presence of consumed alcohol. So working, give me just a second. Having some difficulties. There we go. So the way that the Scram device works is when somebody is consuming alcohol, there's 1% of that is eliminated through insensible perspiration. So on the offender's ankle, that is what is pulled into the device and tested for the presence of the alcohol. It leaves the body completely unchanged because that percentage is not metabolized through the liver. So when they have an alcohol monitoring device on, that information is downloaded and transmitted through what's called a base station, and then it's sent for data review to the manufacturer. They have a 3-step process for reviewing data and confirming those. And the third step of that is that another data analysis goes through the same information to verify that the information that they're providing is correct. And then the final step obviously is to pass that onto our office. When we download or when we get information from a device, we see the information right away. We don't take action until it's confirmed as an alcohol drinking event or not an alcohol drinking event. The same with tamper violations. The data transmission methods that have really changed over the years. We started with just one option, and now we have different options for getting the information off of the bracelet and to the monitoring agency. There's a standard base station that can be used with the landline telephone. It's kind of going away because folks don't use landline telephones as much as they used to anymore. There is a combination of using a standard base station and an Ethernet and plugging it through their computer modem. There also, our most recent is a wireless base station that it does all the same work and it doesn't require either a telephone line or the Ethernet connection. And the final one that we don't use a whole lot, but it does work for folks that don't have a home to house the base station in, is coming into the office for a direct connect application where we download their bracelet and read their information at the same time. The pros and the benefits to doing transdermal alcohol monitoring is that it requires very little client participation. The barriers that you see with breath testing, with urine testing, is that they are taking time off of work, or there's transportation issues. There's a lot of things that act as barriers to get in for those testing. And the transdermal testing, I believe, is way more accurate because it is a 24-hour monitoring tool. There's not really a way to escape those tests to be able to drink on the sly. If you get a breath test in the morning and a breath test in the evening, you know, there's a way to manipulate those. Scram devices are very effective in a treatment setting also. We have a lot of folks that stay on a Scram device in other jurisdictions that I work in. They stay on the Scram device for the first phase of treatment, and that really helps. And I heard some comments with talking about like looking at the measurement of success. This week up in Bellingham, we had somebody that was removed off of a Scram device, and his comment to us was, "I just want to thank you guys so much. I have been sober for 9 months, and I never would have gotten sober without this device on." So you know, when we're working with people, we do get that opportunity to get that, you know, those kind of connections. There are plenty that don't care for us and don't care for the devices either, but we do get to see people, when you're looking at folks that have been on Scram for 90 days or longer, that's where you see an implement of change. And we get to see that piece of change too, as they're kind of getting their lives together and making those changes. This is just an example of a breath test program and where they could potentially drink and still test sober for their next breath test. So when we download a Scram device and the data is immediate to staff, here's an example of what we're looking at. On this graph, you'll see there's 3 lines. The red is the body temperature. The blue is the infrared, which connects with their skin and makes it so that they can't tamper with the device, put anything between their leg and the device to try to interfere with the testing. And then the black line is the transdermal alcohol concentration. And in this particular example, this is an actual alcohol consumption. The Scram device is one of the only ones that'll determine whether alcohol has been consumed versus environmental. And it's like 6 points of criteria that has to be met before AMS will determine that it is in fact a drinking event. Here's an example of somebody that was around environmental alcohol, where you see just a really sharp increase, and then it stays, and it depends on the environment where they're getting exposed to. We would see something like this. We see it sometimes in mechanic shops. We see it in bakeries, and those that are bartending too. They're around alcohol. But this would not be confirmed as a drinking event because it's an environmental exposure to alcohol. And then this is what happens when we took a device and we placed some things between the leg and the device. Just an example of how that infrared will change due to a potential tamper or an attempt to tamper with the device. Our electronic monitoring program is, we use a GPS device. One more thing about the alcohol device that I forgot to mention is it can be used for curfew monitoring also. It does a radio frequency and will tell you that that person is home or not at home, but it doesn't track their presence. So where you're looking for, we get court orders where they're tracking for presence and tracking for alcohol, they're usually needing to wear 2 devices if they need to be tracked on GPS. So we use the Rely Alert device. I have and continue to test devices that are out there because there's a lot of different monitoring equipment out there. And we demo them, we try them, we do it from the point of the offender and from the point of staff working it. And we have consistently stayed with this device. The components of it there's a microphone, a speaker. The device has the ability to do a vibration alert. It also has a 95 decibel siren that can be used when you're trying to enforce compliance. It also has an internal battery. It does require that the offender, charge their device, and we try to get them to charge it twice a day for an hour at a time. The devices, even though we require and have folks sign an agreement that they're charging their device every single day, the device will hold a battery charge for more than 24 hours. I have seen with the most recent device updates, I have seen them last more than 48 hours without a charge. We charge them, they're on a charger before we install them, and then we do direct our participants to charge them every single day. If they miss a charge, the device will vibrate to kind of get their attention, and we tell them, if your device is vibrating, plug it in and charge it. The straps that we use for the Rely Alert device are hypoallergenic, and these ones that are shown in this picture are the flexible standard strap. There is also what's called a secure cuff. I've worked with some jurisdictions that use the secure cuff. We don't necessarily need to use that. It's a solid steel cuff that is not flexible. The cuff that we use is the flexible strap that has a fiber optic light in it. So once that device is installed, we get a tone that generates that there's the continuity of the light. If somebody is tampering with the device, it'll give us a tamper alert. The internal components of the device that we use, there are 3. It has a cellular communication module, a GPS module, and a central processing unit. And I'm just going to briefly explain what each one of those do. The cellular communication is what transmits the data and the location to us. We use devices that have the technology to go from tower to tower and look for the strongest cell signal that's available. We have the ability to call our offenders through the device. If we do that, all of those calls are recorded and kept on file. That communication will also send the GPS locales to the monitoring center. The GPS component, we can live track our people. We see them in real time. We also, the device is reporting back to us at 1-minute intervals or 5-minute intervals, depending on the setup for their risk level. The GPS accuracy is usually is 50 feet in a standard situation. It can be up to 6 feet, and that's constantly looking to assess the situation. The geo rules or addresses that we put in, if those are violated, those get reported immediately. The central processing unit in the device is what holds the geo rules, and the geo rules are their zones, where they're allowed to be, where they're not allowed to go, and their schedule. Somebody's on standard home detention, we would have a zone about their work, their treatment agency, and of course their home, and then a schedule for the time frames. If they were to violate those zones, we get notified of that. It also has the ability to, if a person has GPS on their device, but they're low on cell, they're in an area where there's no cell service, the device will store that information. When they leave the location and get to a cell location, all of that data is then uploaded and transmitted at that time. We have the ability to have endless, 250 zones per person, which would be incredibly difficult. I've never had that many. We also have the ability to create a library of zones. So in some of the jurisdictions, there are standard conditions, no bars or taverns. So instead of creating that for every single offender, we create one for the county, and then we can save it and attach it to each offender that it applies to. We also have the same inclusion zones for home, work, treatment. Exclusion zones are when there's a no contact order, prohibited area, and those zones show up on the map as red. The other thing we have is the ability to track people at different levels. Regardless of what monitoring level they're at, we can see them in real time. The monitoring levels only dictate to us when tracking events are recorded, whether it's 1 minute or 5 minutes. This is just an example of what you would see as an inclusion zone on the map. The alarms that we deal with or that we get notified of is obviously if they violate that zone. Say they're home 24/7 and they run off and go to the store, we would get a violation alarm. And then when they go back into the zone or they comply with the request to go back into the zone, we get a compliance alert. The same with an exclusion zone. They show up on the map as red. Court orders will dictate the size of the zone, the protected area or the residence of the victim, work, school, whatever the situation is, and we create those zones. We do have jurisdictions that folks are required to stay within the county, so we would have every surrounding county be an exclusion zone and monitor their compliance that way. We also will get alerts regarding the battery. So as I said, we have folks sign an agreement that say that they're going to charge their device twice a day. If they don't, we get several alerts that become available to us to know that they aren't charging properly. And like I said, that device is going to last a long time before it starts to drain the battery. At a 9-hour, we get a battery low. At that point, their device would be vibrating as a trigger to get them to charge it. And most folks will just charge their device at that time. But if not, those alerts continue to come in as the device is losing its power. So 5 to 6 hours before that device will shut down, we get a critical, and then a critical escalate at 3 to 4 hours before the device is going to shut down. We also have the ability, if somebody were to crack the back of the case on the device, if there's light that enters that device anywhere, that will trigger a case tamper detection. We also have an alert that will say if the device hasn't moved, it's a no movement alert device, and it's so sensitive that it doesn't, like if somebody is a very still sleeper and they just don't move, it doesn't trigger the device. It's really a device that's sitting on a surface and not moving. But if someone were to tamper with their straps, we get the strap tamper, and then that alert escalates to an optical disconnect and an optical extended disconnect where they've cut the strap or they've ripped it off or somehow gotten it off and it's just sitting there. Other communication alarms that we get, if they are without communications, so they're not around cell service, and then again, they come in as a loss escalated, and then when they resume communication, at that point we would see all of the stored data if they were getting GPS, if they were in view of enough satellites to get GPS, but not cell to transmit the data. Once the communication resumes, all of that data is then forwarded to the website for a review. And the same thing if they go to an area without GPS. We get an alert when there's been no GPS for 10 hours, and then another escalated alert when it's been 24 hours without GPS. We use, and a secure website to monitor the offenders. So as staff, as case managers, we just have the site up all the time, but there is a monitoring center that just monitors for violations 24/7. And those are the ones that are alerting us of any violation. And those protocols are set on risk level, whether we're getting instantly notified and based on the alert, or if we're getting a next day notification. This is just an example of what we would be doing if we were looking at our clients. The mapping to the left, each of the dots represents one track for this particular offender. We could have several offenders that we're looking at the same time. Each one's going to be represented by a different color on the map. Every individual trace gives us the date and the time of the trace. It also tells us how many satellites are attached to the device at that location, their battery level, their cellular level. And we can also change the way that we look for a time frame if we're really needing to zone in on where somebody has been for a length of time, maybe a residence or something. So we can set it to just any time frame that we want. We could be looking at 1 hour, we could be looking at 1 week. It also gives us the ability, is we're alerted that somebody is violating or starting to violate, we can be on here and we have the ability from the software to set off both the vibration alert and the siren if necessary. We get real-time and historical tracking information. Their schedules and their zones are just really easy to do with the software, and we can change them in just a matter of minutes. We also have what's called the crime scene correlation, where there has been, and most recently just yesterday, in another location, one of our offices was burglarized. And so we can take a crime scene correlation with the date and time and the address that we want to look at. And anybody that is on a Rely Alert tracking device that was in that vicinity would show up. If it's not one of our offenders, and if it is an offender on a similar device, we're able to contact the monitoring agency and give that information to law enforcement. The software also lets us give customizable reports, which is really helpful to be able to print out reports and mapping to file with violations. And some jurisdictions really like that. It's just a real visual of what's going on. In the same time, I've had folks that have been accused of committing crimes, and because they're wearing this GPS device, we've been able to pull up their data and be able to provide that to them in the situation that they weren't where they said that they were accused of being. Here's just another example of the mapping and the street view, where we can really, if they are reporting to, there are times where you have like 2 stores side by side, one's a sub shop and one's a marijuana shop. You can really get in there and see exactly what, for the street view, exactly where they're at. It's also good for any field work. If you're going to an area, and in Bellingham, we don't do that. We're not going to homes or places of work, but in those areas where we are, it's really good if it's a neighborhood that we're not familiar with and we can get the street view mapping. It's very helpful. So these are just the highlights of the device. I mean, I am a fan of this device. I've used it for a lot of years, and I find that especially in high risk situations, that the ability to call them through the device, the ability to set off the siren, those are things that that have just, in the situation where they're really needed, they're very valuable. We have the ability to actively track or passively track, and the difference would be an active tracked person is somebody that I'm going to get called 24 hours a day on any alert that's generated. Passive tracking is we're getting notified the next day. The cellular triangulation I didn't talk much about, but if their cell service is not the best, it will give us a radius of the location, although it cannot pinpoint the location until the cell service comes back. We have both 3G and 4G capability. The 2- and 3-way voice communication, that is where I can call through. I do have to call through the monitoring center to be able to talk to the offenders on the device. These devices are capable of 55+ hours of battery operation. They're water resistant, but not waterproof. So we do have the offender sign an agreement that they won't hot tub or go into a swimming pool with the device on. The tamper resistant features are the straps that would give us information that they're trying to tamper with it or breaking the back of the case. We talked about the inclusion zones and the exclusion zones and the siren, which can be a very, very valuable tool. The store and forward feature and the other alerts that we talked about. And that's all I have. Feels like I was talking for a while there.
Thank you, Ronnie. Is there any questions for Ronnie in reference to this presentation or Friendship Diversion Services? I'm not seeing hands, so I might need help.
We have a few hands. Ronnie, if you're done with your presentation, can you stop sharing, please? Stephen and Jackie both have their hands raised.
Go ahead, Stephen.
Thank you, Ronnie. Will we be able to have your PowerPoint presentation distributed?
Oh, I could send that to you.
And I'm wondering, obviously you get these alerts and the information to some central location, but then it has to be communicated somehow to law enforcement. And I'm wondering how active or passive your contracts are in that regard in Whatcom County.
So in Whatcom County, we're in contract with just the cities, as Darlene and Raylene were mentioning. And at what point in time we would contact law enforcement? The only time we direct contact law enforcement is somebody entering an exclusion zone. Otherwise, the violations are by written form presented to the court, prosecutor, attorneys, and probation when necessary. Does that answer your question? And it's immediate. If we have somebody that is on an exclusion zone, that is the point, is that we get contacted right away. We also are able to verify that this is an active alert, that it's a valid alert.
How frequently or with what delay are the written reports communicated?
The written reports, so we spend the first part of every morning going through tracking events, looking for violations and looking to verify that they are true violations, and then those reports are filed that day with the court. In the alcohol monitoring device, so I was talking specifically about GPS, but let me clarify. Alcohol monitoring reports, I could download a device and have a client in front of me and see the information in front of me, but that information has to be verified by alcohol monitoring systems as a valid and confirmed event before I would file a violation on it. And they go through, like I said, their process, but they will let us know that day. If I have somebody that I am looking at, I can call them and say, can you expedite this? But we usually would get that information back the same day, with the caveat that if somebody is truly drinking alcohol, when it is a transdermal measurement of alcohol in their body, they have to get back down to a 0.0 before they'll confirm it as consumed alcohol. And alcohol stays in your system through your sweat for about 8 hours. So what we see is people that are start a drinking event and it has to get to a 0 before it's confirmed. But then yes, a violation is written right then. So we don't want to write violations that are not accurate. Definitely.
So can I ask, and I mean, maybe you said this earlier, but I just wondered what the false positive rate or false incidents reported would be for some of those instruments that you're using.
On the alcohol monitoring equipment?
Yeah, well, I was kind of interested in most of them, but whatever you've got.
So for the alcohol monitoring equipment, there is a very low false positive report. I was at a training right before the pandemic in which they had 2, I believe, and this is a nationwide program. What they will say is that they believe that there are more false negatives because of the criteria that they're held to report a true consumed alcohol event. And as far as the GPS device, it's pretty clear that somebody has left their zone or has not left their zone, enters an exclusion zone or doesn't enter an exclusion zone. So we report the factual data, what we see. We have people that have all sorts of reasons for doing what they do, but that doesn't factor into whether the violation gets filed or not. The violation will get filed if they have a story that goes along with it that we've talked to them before the violation's filed. We include that in our report to the court, and then it's really between the prosecutor, the public defender, and the court to make a decision.
Thank you. That's very helpful information, all of it. I appreciate your presentation, and I also had wanted to ask if we would be able to get it because some of the slides went by so fast.
Oh, sorry about that.
I wasn't
Okay,
able
yes,
to
no problem.
track what was going on.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Jackie, just a quick follow-up on actually both Jackie and Stephen's questions on the alcohol monitoring. There are times that prosecution will request that they're also on active probation for either GPS or alcohol monitoring. And if there's an alcohol violation, many times they're ordered to report immediately to probation and have a test done at probation that goes back several days. So it's confirmed from Friendship Diversion Services and then another testing done at probation. So they're pretty solid when that happens. We haven't had any real issues with any concerns about them being false. There are lots of people that tell us that they didn't tamper with them, but usually we get the truth at the end of it. On the question that Stephen brought up about the GPS, I just wanted to read a section that I received from Ms. Donovan, our Small Cities Domestic Violence. She submitted that to me today. She couldn't be at this meeting, but she said, in domestic violence cases where victims are frightened of further violence, I hear strong support from victims from GPS monitoring when defendants are released from jail. When GPS is set up with active monitoring within 24/7 notification to law enforcement of a no contact order location violation, Friendship Diversion Services is able to provide active monitoring. I don't know if other monitoring companies do active 24/7 monitoring. It is essential for GPS monitoring when there are safety concerns. GPS relies on technology which can fail, so it doesn't provide the same safety level to the victim as holding a defendant in jail. However, most defendants are released PR or post bail when there are ongoing safety concerns and the defendant is released from jail. Victims report enormous peace of mind knowing that GPS monitoring is in place. Benefits of GPS monitoring in domestic violence cases include discouraging defendants from going to the victim's home, workplace, or when prohibited from no contact order and immediate notification to law enforcement. It is also a benefit that the GPS company shows the defendant a map with a circle around the prohibited areas at the distance set by the no contact order, so they can be shown exactly where they are not allowed to be. We have had a number of violations of no contact order cases where the violation was detected by GPS and might not have otherwise been known. Just positive feedback from the domestic violence victims advocate. There's been concerns when people walk out the door with a no contact order that it's just a piece of paper. Obviously, people can still cut the devices off. There still can be violations happening because they protect the certain locations. If they run into them outside of those locations, there is a possibility for violations to occur. But it's a tool that can be used that's been very beneficial for the victims in the cases that Carol's been mentioning. Thank you.
Can I just circle back to, I forgot to answer Kathy's question about the compliance on the alcohol monitor. And I can say that over 2020, with our alcohol monitoring, that compliance has been an issue. I mean, the 9% success rate or sober days is still a fabulous compliance rate. And in my experience in dealing with the offenders, one of the biggest obstacles that those folks faced when treatment closed, it wasn't necessarily treatment, it was the live in-person sober support groups. And we had multiple offenders that had so much trouble trying to attend sober support meetings through Zoom, to be able just to manipulate through the system. It took them a while to pick it up, but in my experience in all of our offices, that was the number one factor that that played into a lot of relapses, a lot of violations, was that lack of contact with their treatment and their treatment sober support groups. So I just wanted to touch back on that because I forgot to mention that.
Thank you, Ronnie.
Mhm.
Any other questions for Ronnie? Seeing no hands, I want to thank you again, Ronnie, for being available and to present all this valuable information to us. And then I believe we can move on to Jackie. I'm sorry, we're running short on time, Jackie, but hopefully you can get some information out there for us.
I'll be quick, and I actually have two announcements. One of them is that the recovery house that was broadly supported by this committee in particular, way back in 2016, is soon to come to fruition, and the operator of the facility, which is Lifeline Connections, is going to have a little fundraiser in April 27th from 12 to 12:30. It'll be an online event, and they're looking to raise $10,000 for various and sundry things that they need. So should get more information out about that relatively soon. Ann Deacon will be a guest speaker, and Greg Winter will be a guest speaker at that event. So just wanted you to know about that. And then the other one was I met with an agency by the name of Acadia Health Services, who is making an application to the Department of Health and to the Health Care Authority to set up opiate treatment program services. They're very similar to medication-assisted treatment, except that they're federally regulated because it's presumed the facility will have methadone on site and available for people for whom that is the best treatment. And so since this agency made application to Healthcare Authority, they have a few months, the state has a few months to conduct a needs assessment and bring in some data and talk about what the need is, hold a public forum. And if everything goes well, the agency plans to be up and running in July. So any questions on either of those?
I'm seeing no hands. Am I missing anything? All righty. Thank you, Jackie. That was very quick. I was expecting a little more, but I'm very happy with what you presented. So thank you. I think we have other businesses. Does anybody have any other business? Any requests for any future presentations or discussions? I think reentry is something that we might want to look at again. Obviously, we also want to focus on some more data information that we want for the index committee to assist us with. And I think we want to look at how we can use the GARE program as that's been talked about. So those are just some things that I'm brainstorming and throwing out there. If anybody else has anything else, please go. And is there any other business that I'm missing? All righty, then I think we can go to public comment as it's 12:54. Jill, can you help me out with that?
Yes, we have 2 attendees today. If either of you would like to comment to the committee, please virtually raise your hand at this time. No hands are raised.
All right, with that, I believe we can call the meeting adjourned then at 12:54 on February 9th. I'll see you all next month. Thank you for your attendance and assistance in this meeting.